Hello. Welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie, the good doctor from London. And we are here to talk to you today about the latest in the world of UFC-sanctioned violence. Henry Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw squared off for some 30-odd seconds in the main event of UFC Brooklyn, which I can't make myself do this once I actually start broadcasting. I'm going to call the event UFC Cejudo versus Dillashaw. Hopefully the last super fight, undeniably super, and no one asked for it and no one really cared, and it was sort of perfectly anticlimactic, especially because it came at the end of what was, I think you will agree, Phil, a very good fight card.
Yep, it was excellent. I mean, one of the things we've discussed is that really good fight cards often come in a variety of different flavors, and this one really did. I mean, we got kind of tactical dismantlings, we got wars, we got crazy KOs, crazy submissions. The fight that topped it off at the end, I mean, it was like many of these super fights have been somewhat anticlimactic, just in terms of how quickly it was over. Mm-hmm. But you know, for a capper onto a pretty exciting night of fights, it was still pretty, it was exciting. You might have wanted a bit more, back and forth, but there's no denying that there was you got that feeling of, wow, things have been shaken up.
Oh yeah, it's something you'll remember, no doubt. Can we mention that real quick? You and I were discussing this the other day. We just spent an hour and a half having a political discussion, by the way. I feel the listeners should know that. If I seem either weirdly tired or weirdly energized for the start of a show, it's because of that. But Phil, you and I were talking about how the super fights all suck, and I guess you could go back to an earlier era, like maybe, I don't know, GSP versus BJ Penn. That was a super fight. But in the modern era, this current spate of super fights, quote unquote super fights, seems to start with Silva Diaz as the modern era's first, ooh, what if these two crazy guys you would never have expected to fight got a chance to fight? And then it goes right up to this fight, which is the newer brand of champion versus champion super fights. And you and I basically determined that, in fact, I think you determined that the championship fights are all disappointingly one-sided, and the non-championship super fights are all just really tepid. And unfortunately, all the super fights kind of suck more than you really want them to. We haven't gotten any incredible classics out of these kinds of matchups. They always just seem Silva Diaz and Faber Edgar were very tepid. And then Nunes Cyborg, Dillashaw Cejudo, I don't know, McGregor Alvarez, all just there's no story, nothing going on. Just one guy just clearly wins.
Yeah, Stipe, DC, and this is probably the most exciting of them that we've seen. Mm-hmm. GSP
Bisping, yeah.
GSP Bisping. But it's clear that, the metric is if there's no belt, it's boring and tepid, and if there is a belt, one guy just obliterates the other.
And it tends to just be the faster one.
Yeah.
Right? Nunes, Dillashaw, DC, and GSP, just the faster fighter just knocks the other one the fuck out. Yep. So, enough super fights, please. Enough. But at the very least, can I say one thing that makes me really grateful? We will get into discussing this fight, and I do think we have quite a bit to say, despite the fact that it only lasted 30 seconds. But a very good piece of news for me is that it will at least be much harder from a PR perspective for the UFC to go ahead with their plans to completely get rid of the flyweight division. Now, I don't know if they care about that kind of PR. Maybe they don't. They've made their TV deals. Phil, you wrote that excellent piece about what the UFC's business model essentially is, which is selling time slots more than it is really appealing to fans to some degree. But at the very least, Henry Cejudo said he was fighting for the division, which is a better narrative than he could have gone for, especially for someone who is just so astoundingly uncharismatic and awkward. But he picked a good narrative for the fight, and then he won in exactly the kind of fashion that, if this was on the Contender Series, Dana White would have signed him before the knockout even happened. He would have been that excited about it. So it was exactly the kind of fight the UFC likes in a division that they are actively trying to get rid of. So I hope that it means flyweight gets to stick around, because flyweight is good, goddammit. We'll talk about Benavidez Ortiz. That was a good fight. Flyweight always has good fights. They're fast and they do a lot. All right? So, but anyway.
Also,
yes.
I would like to point out that it made Dana White super mad.
Yes, always the cherry, literally the bright red cherry on top of any UFC event is that it makes Dana White mad.
Shoutouts back to the UFC's debut on Fox. It's really good. It's always great to see Dana White coming out. You know, he's expecting to have a big coming out party on a new viewing platform, and he's so invested in one of these guys winning that he then promptly shits on the outcome afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So back in Velasquez dos Santos, he was like, I don't know what game plan was. Why was he not shooting? And this time he was just like, oh yeah, early stoppage, bro.
Do you remember that? He got knocked out. He got knocked out in 60 seconds, and Dana was like making it out like he was an idiot for not shooting for 3 takedowns by that time.
Yeah.
It's heavyweight, you dumbass. Yeah, this was definitely the most satisfying anger I've seen out of Dana White since Tyron Woodley knocked out Darren Till. Or submitted Darren Till after knocking him out. He didn't like that. But yeah, that's also a very good thing to take away from this. You can enjoy this event on so many different levels. So let's go ahead and talk about the main event. Henry Cejudo, TJ Dillashaw. Phil, you said a couple of things last week when we were breaking this down. Of course, I think we both picked TJ Dillashaw. We both acknowledged that Henry Cejudo would likely give him some trouble early with the speed and taking advantage of Dillashaw's tendency to plant and fight back. You said a couple things last week, though, that seem really prescient now. One of them notably, even though we only have 30 seconds of fight to look at here, you were like, I don't think TJ likes being the bigger man. I've only seen him a couple times against shorter opponents, and he does not seem comfortable punching down. In fact, he seems far more comfortable punching up at a taller opponent and just sort of having to barely move to get under the return fire coming back at him. Under and around is kind of the way Dillashaw likes to move. And I think he did look a little uncomfortable finding the mark on Cejudo here. Like, he wasn't exactly sure how to maintain range and how to square up with an opponent who was both smaller and faster than him. I think he looked decidedly uncomfortable. He often does early in the fight. But yeah, I mean, did you feel that that those words were resonating for you when you were watching it go down?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I think I would say yes in a kind of qualified way, because like we said, this was pretty much the way that Cejudo was going to win this fight.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we pretty much said unless he's going to have success early, unless he lands the shot of his life and knocks Dillashaw out, he's in for a long night. He's not tremendously defensively sound. He struggles from a distance. So, like, a lot of the times when we look at, like, surprising outcomes, we got to think of whether these are, like, contained in the model of how we saw the fight going anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it wasn't totally outside of the realms of possibility.
The only thing I'll say in retrospect that makes me think it should have seemed more plausible was my long-standing fear and hatred of weight cutting. That I really should have come into this and said, you know what, Dillashaw's cutting a stupid amount of weight. He looks like shit. His chin's going to suck. He's going to get knocked out. But I didn't say that.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, we definitely should have, like, he was so confident about how uncompromised he was.
Yeah.
And he really hasn't ever had the greatest gym. This was Cejudo's kind of main physical advantage, I feel, even more so than the speed. It was that Cejudo was able to come with a kind of no fear, all aggression game plan, because he's just a tank.
Mm-hmm.
Like, aside from that one perfect DJ knee, it's really hard to think of him ever being hurt.
Yeah. He had a regional fight, I think, in LFA or something, where he was staggered. It was like his knees were watery for like 30 seconds or something, but he just like got a takedown. So, like, he's been hurt, but he recovers exceptionally well. And it's not like TJ Dillashaw is a particularly powerful hitter at bantamweight either. So,
yeah. So, and the other thing is that, so going back to the actual fight itself, yeah. Dillashaw, I mean, I mentioned he's not I don't think he's really the deepest stand-up fighter. I think he's a very, very clever stand-up fighter, but he is largely someone who wants to kind of snipe from range. The movement and the stance switching is something that I think he's learned, but what he really wants to do is to kind of cautiously, slowly set people up for the right hand and the left kick. He just wants to kind of peck away at people at range. In this way, Garbrandt was a relatively decent style matchup because Garbrandt is so counter, and because Dillashaw's so smart and so willing to adapt to it, and so willing to adapt. Even if Dillashaw isn't the greatest counterpuncher, he was able to get Garbrandt's timing down. So he's not the most defensively, for example, the greatest fighter. I mean, I'd say Dominic Cruz is probably a better defensive fighter than TJ Dillashaw, but TJ is far more offensively capable.
Yeah.
And his tendency to kind of switch stances and shift on the outside just as something to do is, to give the kind of and it's some kind. I think it's at least partially a tick to sort of partially something where he just wants to establish tells in his opponent's mind. He wants them to think, he wants them to be confused as to when he's going to be in what stance. It meant that he's always been kind of vulnerable to people just kind of blitzing and catching him. And the other thing we saw is that, like, people don't really kick with TJ much. He's tended to fight boxers or wrestlers. We think Garbrandt, Lineker, Assunção. It's rare that people have aggressively tried to kick him. And that was really that was what made this much more dangerous, I think. That was where the model kind of falls down a bit, is that it was Cejudo's ability to punch off his kicks and kick off his punches, because Dillashaw either bites down and throws back when he's in trouble, or he just kind of circles out and just tries to get out of there with pure foot speed. He doesn't really have much of a pivot, much of a nuanced counterpunching game.
Nope.
And
in a lot of ways, the stance switches are sort of a band-aid for not pivoting. Like he can switch stance and just sort of walk off to the side in either direction. But this is something I wish we'd mentioned more often in the lead up to this, something I used to harp on a lot. But there is a fundamental risk in being a stance switcher, which is that you are presenting a lot of momentary opportunities for someone who wants to catch you while you're not fully balanced. You are essentially, if you're switching stance in range, you're crossing your feet. And we know that is an error. It just takes somebody who is actually capable of reading your stance switches and capitalizing, or just being fast enough and blitzing right through them, as I think Cejudo may have done here.
Yeah. So that was kind of what we saw. We saw him, just kind of blitzing in to catch Dillashaw, whilst he's trying to set up, and B, just corralling him back into place with kicks. Is that he would try and circle out, and Cejudo would immediately just try and boot him. And that's pretty much kind of it. I mean, I think in general, I think it wasn't utterly crazy to me. Dillashaw is neither defensively invulnerable or particularly durable, but it was still pretty fucking surprising.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that in retrospect you wish you would have said, or you wish you would have identified as distinctly possible as it was. I mean, even in the aggregate, like, maybe this is still a very slim outcome. This doesn't happen very often, but I'm not sure that I would, if they rematch. I don't think I'm going to pick Cejudo again. I mean, just because it still feels like a very unlikely way to beat Dillashaw, doesn't it? Like, even if who knows, even if that stoppage had just not happened at the time that it did. And I'm not going to vehemently argue that it was early, that it was an early stoppage. Like, I can see an argument for why people wanted the fight to keep going. Dillashaw was at least still moving around, was still actively trying to improve his position. He wasn't having great success, though.
Yeah. If you get dropped like 3 times in 10 seconds, and, on at least one, on the last one, you get the old bobblehead punches on the way down.
Yeah.
I think the ref is more than. It reminds me of Henderson Dos Anjos. Like I was a bit upset by that one when I saw it because I was a big Bendo fan, but then I was also just like, you can't let that happen. You can't get dropped and then immediately get re-dropped.
Yep.
Refs will just not let that happen.
Mm-hmm. Because at the very least it shows. But even if it hadn't happened, if Dillashaw had managed to survive, this could still be a winning matchup for him last weekend. But I think it's worth like taking a roll of all the factors that we believe played a part, and like Dillashaw not being very durable and cutting weight, making himself almost certainly making himself significantly less durable, is a factor that I wish I had harped on more. I just hate X factors in analysis so much. But when you're deliberately cutting weight from your body, it's not an X factor. Like, it's something you're doing to yourself. You are sacrificing something to gain an advantage elsewhere. And Dillashaw's advantage really was like never going to be his size. Not only because, as you again very presciently pointed out, he's much more comfortable being the shorter fighter, but he's also like not like a dominant top position wrestler. He doesn't have a fighting style that you'd think would benefit from size. You'd think rather he has a style that would benefit from being faster and smaller. And yeah, we knew it would probably be a hard first round. It was just a very, very quick and very, very hard first round. So that's that. What was your reaction when it happened? I'm curious. I want our listeners to fill us in as well. But for me personally, I was watching, and then it happened, and then about 5 seconds of silence elapsed, and then I just sort of weirdly laughed. Like, well, that's that.
Pretty much exactly the same thing. Like, I came in really expecting to want to root for TJ.
Yeah.
You know, he's been like, particularly when you root for someone to pull a huge upset and they do it, they always tend to be your guy from that point on. And for me, it was picking him to beat Barao. And since then, it was always my guy. But he's been such a dickhead in the run up to this whole thing.
Yeah, he really came across like a fucking Pinkerton too, with like his talk about wanting to help the UFC destroy the flyweight division, not caring about it. It's like, come on, bro.
Yeah. And it was just the idea of him being happy to be turned into the right hand of Dana White, and that it actually made it like pretty funny to watch him get crushed. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
and how insanely salty he was afterwards.
Yeah, I just saw once again.
Disabuse me of that.
I just saw once again thank you UFC production crew for this. But when Bruce Buffer is reading out the official decision as he starts, they just do a close-up shot of TJ Dillashaw's face, and he just says, "Wow." Just utterly shocked and disappointed. You have to enjoy it in the moment. I mean, Henry Cejudo is a marble-mouthed, uncharismatic, weird person, but he is now the savior of the flyweight division, and I will always love him for that. And I hope he has more embarrassingly stilted stunts to pull in the lead ups to his next defense. Man, when he pulled up that snake on the stage, that was so fucking cool.
Oh, that was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably it's going to have to be a slightly more rehydrated snake this time.
It has to make a slightly wetter slap when it hits the stage. All right, before we move on, we didn't talk about this last week, except in passing. And we're going to basically give it the same treatment here. But before we wrap up segment 1, speaking of things that make Dana White mad, Greg Hardy lost his fight. And he lost it in one of the dumbest ways possible, which is to grab the head of an opponent who is clearly down on both knees at the time you do it, and then just crack them in the side of the head with your knee. Now, I guess the only question to ask is, why is Dana White's takeaway from this performance that Greg Hardy is very good at MMA? Because that seems to be what he took away from this. It's like, hey, say what you will. The kid can fight. It's like, that was a bad fight. I don't know. It was really sloppy and shitty. It looked like heavyweight MMA, but not at its best.
Dana White does not like to back down from things.
Is that?
I think that's pretty much it. And the fact that everyone was like, why are you signing this guy? You're a fucking moron. And then the guy goes out and has one brief burst of violence, then gasses out really bad, gets taken down by a bottom-rung UFC heavyweight, and then fouls his way out of the fight. Like, what do you say? Actually, you know what? I was an idiot to sign this guy. He has no self-control. He's a complete liability. And in fact, he's actually not even that good.
I literally only signed him because he's a bad person, and people care about that. That's it. Yeah, that's exactly what I would have expected Dana to say. He's
right.
So.
I mean, that's because that was the best thing about it. It wasn't just that he self-destructed by doing something like as apropos as inflicting illegal violence on someone after they upset him by being mean to him.
Yeah.
Like, you could have seen that one coming. It wasn't just that. It was that he made himself look shitty beforehand.
Yeah.
If he'd been completely dominating the fight and then had done that, at least you could sell him as some kind of monstrous heel that everyone on the UFC roster would be, like, calling out to fight. In this way, he just made himself look like a scrub and a moron.
He got enough time to prove that he's a regional heavyweight with decent athleticism and nothing more, but also that he's a shithead.
Yeah, tremendous. Almost
tremendous.
Perfect.
I mean, yeah, it was like I don't enjoy the prospect of paying, honestly, of helping support a company that pursues these kinds of angles. But it is nice when it plays out this way. It's so fun to enjoy the narrative being upset. It really is. And we had two big narratives upset in the main and co-main of this card. So a very good way to cap things off, I think. Very weird, very good, very weird. The rest of the card, however, was actual MMA. And we are going to talk about all of that in segment 2. In fact, I guess I should spell it out. We're going to get into this sort of thematically. Was that our plan, Phil?
Yep,
it was something like that. Oh, but I have to reopen Twitter in order to.
Yeah. So I think our second segment was the old dog standing their ground segment.
Yes. All right, so I'm just slowly reopening it, and I can edit this, Phil. You know, I have that power.
It's too much for you.
Yeah, well, clearly. So yeah, we're going to structure today's show a little thematically, as Phil said. Segment 1, essentially just the big dumb disappointments. Enjoyable big dumb disappointments, but Cejudo, Dillashaw, Hardy, Crowder. Segment 2, we're going to talk about the old dogs standing their ground against young prospects, trying to take them out. Of course, we had Joseph Benavidez, we had Glover Teixeira, we had Cowboy Cerrone, all of them getting very big, impressive wins on this card. And segment 3, we're going to talk about the up-and-comers who managed to make the most of this showcase on UFC Cejudo versus Dillashaw, namely Gregor Gillespie, Jeff Neal, Corey Sandhagen, and possibly a little more after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands. As said, in segment 1, we're going to be talking about some old boys, some dinosaurs, the old lions, I don't know if you'll help me out. What's another good way to talk about somebody who's like past their best?
I think you pretty much covered it. It's the old dogs showing they've still got some tricks to play on the youngsters. The
crafty veterans. We had a couple of guys who are a couple of fighters in this card who are all in their primes, great fighters. All of them still arguably great fighters in their given divisions, but have now officially reached crafty veteran status. Those were Joe Benavidez, who fought Dustin Ortiz on the main card, Glover Teixeira, who fought Carl Roberson in the main card opener, and Donald Cowboy Cerrone, who took on Alex Hernandez in the featured prelim on ESPN. And all the old boys won their fights. And I wasn't expecting that across the board to be, well, a couple of them were kind of givens. They were all still very good performances, I think. Let's talk about Joe B and Dustin Ortiz first, especially because so much of this card does have to do with the fate of the flyweight division. What did you make of this fight, man? It was a rematch of a fight that was previously contested. Ortiz has sort of been on a bit of a hot streak, but Benavidez is currently on his reminding us how good he is tour.
Yeah, this fight was amazing. Like, this was genuinely this is one of the best pure grappling matches I think I've seen in MMA, period. Like, if I think of
and it had some knockdowns and shit.
Yep. Just in terms of, like, the combination of jiu-jitsu and wrestling and how those actually led to a really compelling back-and-forth fight, I think it's rare that you find something that's as, like, consistently thrilling as this fight was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think I might have heard some booing at some point, maybe, but those people are clearly completely insane. But this was just tremendous. There were just like it was just a library list of a laundry list of just grappling techniques, of just kind of reshooting and sitting out and Granby rolls and like just a tremendous kind of pace that you could. I mean, it really was an advertisement for the flyweight division, because it was the only division that this kind of thing could have happened in.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only one where you could have kept that kind of pace and had those kind of scrambles.
It's the scramble division, goddammit. I want my scrambles. Yeah, it was really good. I kind of want to talk about, since we are talking about the old dogs here, we had somewhat of a hard time assessing what had changed in Dustin Ortiz, if anything, to lead to his recent string of victories. But what do you think of like Benavidez's performance here? I think we're still in kind of the process of evaluating where he's at. Of course, it wasn't that long ago we were expecting Alex Perez to beat him because he lost to Sergio Pettis and was just kind of looking like he was on the downslide. He clearly still is physically, but where did the crafty veteran wiles come through to get him a win here?
I think primarily it was in sacrificing activity for position.
Did you say sacrificing activity for position?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, yeah, one of the things we saw from Dustin Ortiz was that Ortiz was incredibly active with strikes the whole time. And that I think if we look at the strike counter, I'm sure he's probably ahead, right? In terms of for fight metric. So when they were locked up in clinch positions, Ortiz would constantly be trying to kind of throw strikes and stay active. And this is generally a good strategy. I mean, particularly if you are a very good like grappler and can survive grappling exchanges. But Benavidez was much more dogged in making sure that he was forcing Ortiz into checkmate positions.
Mm-hmm.
Because Ortiz is not a checkmate he is not a checkmate grappler. He is someone who gets top position and beats people up. But he is not someone who is traditionally, great at back control or great at, or much of a submission threat. So he can get to control positions, but they're rarely control positions which sort of end the fight. And that's something that we've seen a lot in flyweight in general, is why it has guys like Jussier Formiga. It has guys who are, or Ray Borg, for example, it has guys who are back take specialists. Because this is the point where you can be taken to where scrambling pretty much doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like once someone has the back, because mount and flyweight, incredibly hard to keep.
Mm-hmm.
Almost any other kind of top position, incredibly hard to keep. But if you're in a fight where scrambles are a guarantee, then the back is the one position where no matter what the weight class is, it's very, very hard to get out of it. So Benavidez, he would, often Ortiz would be hitting him with like little hammer fists or knees or whatever, but he was constantly working towards pushing Ortiz to checkmate. But to his immense credit, I mean, and I thought this was an incredible performance from Dustin Ortiz, like the best performance of his career.
Mm. Yeah, I think you might be right.
Ortiz accepted positions like including, body triangle from the back. He just shifted from side to side and managed to reverse it, managed to get back out in that third round. He never for a moment stopped trying to win this fight. I mean, neither of them did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. Like, the flyweight is the scramble division. Obviously, there are other divisions with lots of scrambling, and any division can have a fight with lots of scrambling. But flyweight is particularly well designed for everyone's really small, everyone's really fast, nobody ever stops moving on the ground. But it's interesting that, like, Benavidez, as a crafty old vet now, we saw him sort of leaning into a version of what, like, Demetrius Johnson used to do as well as the UFC champ. Like, he was also very positionally focused on the ground, very, very concerned with control and finding positions from which someone specialized in scrambling would have a harder time escaping. I thought Benavidez did a phenomenal job. Like, for example, they're scrambling on the ground. Benavidez was really committed to whatever his point of control was. If you're in a scramble, you have a figure four grip on someone's arm, you have a Kimura grip. That's a position of control around which you can work. And a lot of good grapplers do that. They get a really tight lock on some part of a position, some point of control, and then work around that. There are a couple times when Benavidez would have like a rear waist cinch or a tight body lock, and Ortiz would be going through all these different modes of scrambling, trying to improve the position, and Benavidez just seemed to know correctly, if I just hold on to this point of control, I will win this scramble, right? Ortiz is going to just keep the scramble going. And the entire time, I'm going to have some way to control him. So all he really had to do a lot of time was just to wait for Ortiz to put himself in the position from which Benavidez's point of control would turn into a dominant position. I thought, it was like a really patient performance, which is kind of the thing you expect to see out of an experienced, crafty, older fighter. It came through in his counterpunching too. Like he definitely, you're correct by the way, Fight Metric does record Ortiz landing over twice as many, 49, throwing 87 to Benavidez's 50, landing 49 to his 21. But Benavidez might have landed the best shots of the fight anyway. He knocked Ortiz down once with a big swinging left hand, and he caught him with some really well-timed counters as Ortiz was rushing in. His own rushing onslaughts are no longer nearly as pretty or as quick as they used to be. But as a counterpuncher, that craft really comes through. And I think this was that kind of performance. This was like a perfect veteran performance. Because you might be right. Like, this might be the peak showing of Dustin Ortiz's career. He fought his ass off, as he always does. He fought his ass off. But Benavidez, like, it was just sort of a more subtle version of what we saw in their first fight, which is he just looked a lot more poised. He looked like the more experienced fighter, and just sort of let Ortiz make his own mistakes.
The stand-up was... I think the difference is the stand-up was far more... Well, both the stand-up and the grappling were more competitive this time. I think Ortiz was far more comfortable taking a shot to deliver a shot, which, kind of got him knocked down in the first round, but it also meant that he was just far more potent when it came to how he was gonna, like, when it came to setting up his own shots, because he wasn't like constantly worrying about how to scare Joe B off.
Yeah.
But also, I think what we saw is that, that thing about getting stuck in checkmate positions isn't something that Ortiz is something that Ortiz has struggled with, because he's fought those specialist kind of guys. He's fought Formiga and Hayes, and those fights were notable for how those guys shut his scrambling down.
Mm-hmm.
And this was what was impressive here, is that he got put into the positions that have always troubled him, and this time he actually found his way back out again.
Yeah, it was his career best response to that kind of counter to his game.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, great fight. Flyweight rules. Please don't get rid of it, you fucking maniacs. Okay, let's move on. Glover Teixeira, Carl Roberson. This one opened up the main card. This one fairly predictable, I think. Like, it sort of played out. I didn't predict that it would be elbows, a few of which were very clearly to the back of the head. I didn't predict that would be the strike that would give Glover Teixeira trouble. But I think the dynamic of the fight, that Roberson would be very powerful and would very likely clip an aging and more fragile Teixeira in the first round, that played out. And I think also the idea that if Carl Roberson was immediately out-grappled and submitted by Cesar Ferreira, he's not going to have fun grappling on the ground with Glover Teixeira. That played out as well. It was very much just an experienced, skillful showing from Teixeira against an opponent who had little to rely on except his athletic ability.
Yeah, I mean, so I had two weird responses to this, which I guess a lot of people did, which was when Glover first got hit by his elbows. I was like, oh, he's done.
Oh, yeah. I thought he was out.
Yeah, I was like, oh, and like in a more, significant sense, I was just like, oh, this is pretty much the end of Glover as a top-level fighter. He looks frail. If he can't get people down, he's just going to get destroyed. And, he was in bad trouble. He wasn't just beaten up with the elbows. He was mounted. Mounted
with an arm trap as he was trying to scramble free, getting hit clean in the face.
And then he scrambled out, and then you get to see, what one of the things that makes a top-level fighter is just pure cussedness. Because he got up and went back to pretty much the same takedown. And then he hit it. And much like his younger clone, not Kutalaba, Sukhanov did.
Oh, okay.
He took him down immediately into mount. And then I had exactly the opposite thing, which was like, Glover has won.
Yes.
Like, the minute that happened, I was just like, oh, it's over.
Yep.
There's no way a middleweight who doesn't have great grappling is getting out from under Glover Teixeira, and that was true.
Yep. Yeah.
It was nice. I liked him punching until Roberson raised his arm to block the punches, and then him holding the blocking arm in place for the arm triangle.
Yeah.
That was sneaky as hell.
He did he did a variation with wrist control. It was essentially an Americana setup. But it was sort of like what Brock Lesnar did to Frank Mir when he had that sort of I don't know what you call it, like a top position chancery or something, a weird quarter Nelson of some kind. He had his arm underneath Frank Mir's head, and then the hand hooked around his bicep, like under his armpit. So his arm was just trapped up beside his head. But this was similar. He just grabbed his wrist, pinned it to the ground, and kept punching him. And it was like, oh, that's an arm triangle. And then very neatly hit it from the opposite side to finish. Beautiful. Glover Teixeira's grappling is cool. Glover Teixeira is also, a super nice guy. Who doesn't like Glover Teixeira? He seems like just an absolute doll. And I'm glad to see him get a win.
Yep. I'd eat at his failing restaurant anytime.
Does he have a failing restaurant?
No, it's a shout out. It's a callback to our Depressed Us discussions.
Oh, yes, that's right. He looks like he owns a failing restaurant. Okay. Oh, for a second, I think I was getting him confused with Jose Aldo. And it was like, wait, is Jose Aldo's burger place failing? Say it ain't so. Okay. All right. Well, Glover Teixeira got a big win there. Not a ton more to say about that one. How about, this one was genuinely one of the most interesting matchups coming in, though. A real crossroads kind of fight. On the prelims, Donald Cerrone and Alex Hernandez. I took a flyer with just a very vague feeling that Hernandez's youth was going to be too much for Cerrone. Once again, expecting the downfall of Cowboy, I was proven wrong. As he came in here and sort of like, I don't know, Cerrone has I think Hernandez thought he could be like Nate Diaz and bully Cerrone. But I think the difference is I don't know, Nate Diaz truly doesn't give a fuck. He also just has longer reach and a better style for Cerrone. But I think the idea that, Cerrone can be bullied by the right kind of fighter. He's also very good at bullying people. This reminded me a lot, even though it was much more violent and action-packed, it reminded me a lot of his fight with Miles Jury. Where it was okay, This guy comes in here, he thinks he has a complete idea of how the fight works, and then Cerrone very quickly wins the psychological war of the bout. He just finds a few key exchanges where it's no, I'm the fucking boss, and the body language of the opponent just changes. There was a turning point about maybe 2 minutes into this fight where it was like the first time that Cerrone landed a kick and then sort of chased Hernandez backwards with a flurry of punches and landed 3 or 4 of them. And I was like, oh, okay. Hernandez knows he's losing now. He has now been convinced that he is losing and is about to officially lose this fight. And that's kind of the way the rest of it played. I mean, he still fought his ass off. It was still a very valiant effort from Hernandez, but Cerrone bullied him much the same way he has many other young fighters who have tried to take him out.
Yeah. So I mean, this was definitely something we touched on because Hernandez is a blitzer, and this quickly encountered a number of problems against Cerrone, and guys like Diaz and Masvidal and Edwards, they are not. They are people who can maintain the pocket, just kind of sit there, hang out, and force Cerrone to box. Mm-hmm. And it is notable that, Cerrone's kicks didn't come until, a few minutes into this fight, because he knows, as a veteran, he knows you can't just be throwing raw kicks at people.
It's the same when he fought Jury. Actually, he threw a kick against Jury early and got taken down, and then he had to kind of pull off of them until he could find the timing.
Yeah. So he's a savvy guy.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is that, so Hernandez had to blitz into the pocket and crash into the clinch, and there became a number of issues around this. So firstly, like, Donald Cerrone is very good in the clinch.
Yep.
Increasingly, this is something that he's really developed in recent years, and this is one of the more impressive things about Cerrone is that he has consistently added tools into his arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly was that Hernandez is, like many hyper-athletic fighters, comfortable watching his work and expecting people to be sort of awed by what he's done.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when he would crash in with, like, those shovel uppercuts, or, which were it was cleverly done. He was mixing up to the body, into the head, and so on. But once
like
he
I
landed,
said, there were some moments in Hernandez's last fight too, where it was like, yeah, we talked about this last week. He's mostly just crashing in, but every fight he has moments of like, ooh, he has a feel for this strike. He's got some craft to it. But anyway, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no worries. It's the fact that he would throw these strikes, and then he would either be in the clinch or he'd be in the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was generally expecting, like, if you are hyper athletic, you get an expectation that the other guy's just going to be shocked by it, that he's just going to be backing out again.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, Cerrone would just run after him immediately.
Mm-hmm.
He would just be chasing him back. He would expect to have this little zone of empty space where he could just retreat back out. And Cerrone just instantly started chasing him down and just throwing long, looping right hands down his exit.
Yeah.
So it was like, it started to be like, okay, I can't really clinch with this guy, and every time I kind of crash into the pocket, I have to retreat back out again. He's just chasing me the fuck down. So what do? Do I just fence with him from range? And that is the end.
Yep.
Like,
don't want to do that with Cerrone unless you're, like, I don't know, Conor McGregor or someone.
I mean, even then, like, you just don't. No one should give Cowboys Cerrone room to kick.
Space and time, to use his kicks. Absolutely. I think you're spot on. Like, the defining characteristic of this fight was that as it went on, it became clear to Hernandez and those watching him that he didn't have any safety zones. He had that Cerrone, despite spending much of the fight retreating and fighting off the back foot, still had this tremendous pressure on Hernandez because Hernandez was like just tied to this idea, like, you have to pressure. I mean, it's like when people used to fight Lyoto Machida. Like, there's the added pressure against Machida of just knowing that you're losing the fight if you're not doing exactly what you needed to do to beat him, right? So, like, you would fight Machida, he would hit you with a bunch of little, real classic model Machida. He would just hit you with a bunch of kicks and jabs and just wait for you to run into the left hand. And if you didn't, you just lost. But usually you ran into that left hand eventually because you knew you were losing. You're like, fuck, this isn't going my way. I'm not getting anything done. And I'm not really hurt. Or like fighting Floyd Mayweather. You and I have talked about this a lot. Cerrone had his own version of that, where it's like Hernandez knew he needed to pressure to win. He was losing every minute that he was not able to pressure into Cerrone, but he couldn't hang around in the clinch. He couldn't even really at a certain point exchange in the pocket because he wasn't able to fight with enough layers. Like, he just doesn't have that level of technique or poise or experience. So he had to just try to land a shot or two and then get back out to avoid the clinch. But yeah, doing that, you're just going to get, like, there were several times where Cerrone did take a big shot and just did the veteran thing. It was like, well, I'm just going to hit him with 5 or 6 shots in a row now that he's hit me. And it's like, he's not going to hit me with that shot again next time. It was a lesson teaching kind of performance from Donald Cerrone.
Yep.
And I thought, I'm going to point this out. Like, Hernandez himself was very candid, I think, on Instagram after the fight, and essentially said the same thing. I think the phrase he used that stuck with me, I'm paraphrasing somewhat here, but was, I learned a lesson there, and I need to learn to fight. I expect to just run through people. I need to learn to fight. And yeah, that's the lesson Cerrone was teaching him in each of these exchanges, is that, like, eventually you're gonna reach a level where the opponent is always going to be ready to fight back. You have to be able to do that too. You cannot just flatten people. You have to be able to fight with a competitive opponent. And so him acknowledging that is hopefully a good sign that this, like, really promising athlete, who definitely had plenty of good moments in this losing effort, will be able to turn it around and take this as a helpful lesson from the old veteran. Yeah.
So there were another couple of elements about it that were interesting. That we talked about Dillashaw as being someone who has always, he wants to be the smaller guy punching up. Cerrone really functions best when he is the taller guy. We most specifically, and something that we called out beforehand, that we were probably likely to see, the step knee.
Yeah, we hadn't seen a lot of those in his welterweight run. Now back at lightweight, the right step knee, the classic Cerrone counter, came back in a huge way. He landed it maybe a half dozen times super cleanly, maybe more.
Yep. And, and it's also it just goes to the point of, when we talk about an old veteran, assuming that they've got their, assuming that they're physically present in any meaningful way, which wasn't necessarily a guarantee for this fight, we ask questions about, is this a style that they're good against? And fighting against a blitzing kind of wrestle boxing style is not just a style that I think Cerrone is comfortable against, but I think it's one of the formative styles that he's learned against. Because if I think about when Donald Cerrone became Donald Cerrone in the way that we look at him now, I think of his fight against Jamie Varner.
The second, like the comeback win.
How many times did they fight? It was the last one.
Twice, I think.
I think it might have been there. Was it there? So there were just 2, right? There was the one which was the DQ due to the injury, and the other one which was, where Cerrone fought him.
Mm-hmm. WEC 38 and then WEC 51.
Yep. And that one was the one where we first saw who Cerrone could be, because up until then in the WEC, he'd primarily just been a sort of Condit-esque grapple on the floor, get taken down all the time, win through sheer violence kind of guy. But in that second Varner fight, he was clearly so mad at Jamie Varner, he was so pissed off at him, that he just showed something completely different. Suddenly, we saw Donald Cerrone, the offensive wrestler, and suddenly we saw him, like, hitting shot takedowns and working his hands more and, like, defending takedowns, which were coming back at him, which was pretty much a first. And I think, he just drove that style matchup into himself. And it's why, if you look at Alexander Hernandez, there's no shame in being someone who has to dart in from the outside, who's a shorter, maybe pretty athletic guy who has to dart in from the outside to try and, work offense on Donald Cerrone, because fucking Eddie Alvarez tried that on Donald Cerrone and it didn't work. There's no shame in it not working. He's good at that kind of fight. He's really good at it.
It's hard to say that Hernandez was any less successful than Eddie Alvarez was. I guess Alvarez had a slightly later and slightly larger moment in the first round, right? But he still got fucking cut.
Alvarez won the first round.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
He prolonged that moment. His experience showed, but he still got cut the fuck down in the second half of the fight. He got absolutely obliterated by the end. These are the kind of performances that really make you appreciate Donald Cerrone, the style he's built. Anytime that, the elbows in the clinch, the fight's still playing in the background for me. The elbows in the clinch in this fight were beautiful, by the way. I don't know when I've seen elbows like that from Cerrone. They were very John Jones-esque, like stepping in elbows from the outside. Matt Brown-esque even.
Robbie Lawler fight.
Okay, yeah.
Robbie Lawler fight was where we first saw them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Like I said, his ability to add new elements to his game while probably still basically retaining the same flaws. Very impressive. Mm-hmm. Go Donald Cerrone.
Yeah, and when Cerrone feels justified rage in his heart, he puts on great fights, man. It was not only a great reminder of who Donald Cerrone is, why he's great, why he's been around beating people's asses for so very long, but also it was just a damn good fight. And so was Benavidez Ortiz. Teixeira Roberson was the only one of the old dogs that was sort of just two quick finishes in opposite directions, one after the other. But the other two, man, very good fights and a big part of what made this card so enjoyable. So let's take one more break. When we come back, we're going to look at, we've covered the old dogs. Now we're going to look at the pups. Jeff Neal, Gregor Gillespie, kind of a pup, isn't he? He's an up-and-comer at the very least. And Corey Sandhagen all got wins on this card as well. We're going to talk about their performances after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Hello, welcome, Heavy Hands. What's up? Oh, thank God. That was it. Was that a good gag, Phil?
Incredible.
I'm a comic genius. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about the young prospects, the up-and-comers. How old is Gregor Gillespie? Let me just double-check. 31. So, not a kid. Not very young. But has only been competing in MMA professionally since 2014 and is really now coming into his own. There are still definitely some significantly harder matchups for Gregor Gillespie out there in a division as deep and as stacked as lightweight. But in taking on Yancy Medeiros, we certainly saw the Khabib-esque relentlessness for which he has made himself known. Takeaways about this performance? It was pretty one-sided, so maybe the biggest takeaway is, hey, Yancy Medeiros actually did an okay job defending takedowns for a while.
Yeah, his game plan wasn't bad, I think, Yancy Medeiros'. No? I mean, in retrospect, it's probably not the one I would give him.
But it wasn't. We knew it was an awful style matchup for him. You know, it was going to be very hard to game plan his way to victory no matter what he tried, I think.
Yeah. So I think his game plan was basically to stay fairly relaxed and to just flow through the wrestling exchanges and to basically wait for his time to get his striking going and not be too gassed when that happened.
Yep.
And again, this is not particularly a bad idea. So, we saw him kind of reaching through to roll for when Gillespie was behind him, kind of going for, I think he went for a Granby roll at some point. Mm-hmm. But generally, he wasn't fighting super hard, so he wasn't draining his gas tank that bad. But the issue here was that this game plan is predicated on, preserve your gas tank, and then when you get a chance to strike, you'll be able to hurt this guy. and he got no chances to strike.
Yeah, I mean, it was, to give him some credit, it was sort of the same game plan Conor McGregor tried against Khabib, you know? Kind of reminiscent. He just didn't get to have that great McGregor third round. And even if he had, like, maybe like McGregor, he wouldn't have been able to knock the guy out the first time that he actually got to stand with him.
Right. And so particularly for, like, Medeiros, I mean, because, McGregor-Khabib was at least more competitive than this. And I think the problem with this is that, in retrospect, we'll know what the most functional game plan for Medeiros is, and it's to go completely fucking hog wild. Like, that's what he should have done. He just should have come out and just tried to bicycle kick, flying knee, and just lower his stance and just throw billions of punches at Greg Gillespie as hard as he possibly can.
I think his problem is that he didn't get his ass kicked hard enough. If he'd gotten a truly Trinaldo level ass whooping, he would have come back really, really hard in round 3.
But yeah, like his main, that's the thing, his main path to victory is clearly just try and wipe Gillespie out before he gets handed him. But the thing is, that's obviously a tremendously destructive game plan to try and give your fighter, because you're basically saying you don't have a chance against this guy in an actual, like, extended fight. You need to take him out early or else you're fucked.
Right.
And this is why I think people have somewhat unfairly criticized game plans like McGregor-Nurmagomedov, because you can't come out with a game plan which says just ruin this guy in round 1, because if you end up in round 2, you're going to be like, shit, this is uncharted territory.
I remember back in the day when I wrote back in the day, such an old man. I'm an old dog myself now, Phil. But I remember when I wrote the game planning for Vitor Belfort against Chris Weidman. It was how Vitor Belfort beats Chris Weidman. It was coming up with like a 3-point keys to victory thing for him. And I remember the comments of people saying, like, well, why didn't you point out don't get taken down? It's sort of along the same lines of that. Is like, your game plan can't be based on how good a chance the other guy has of just wrecking you. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be about how you can wreck him, right? It can't just be about avoiding. It can't be that that cautious, that inherently protective, because fighting is not a protective business. It's you have to beat the other guy up.
Yep. But yeah, so I mean, it wasn't a bad plan in retrospect, but it was also one that left him with almost zero chance of actually winning.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, Greg Gillespie is a scary fucking dude who does not get tired and who does not let go, and who is, I mean, it's partially that he just doesn't look like a physically overwhelming fighter, but I think we have to address the fact that he's like on a 5-fight stoppage streak over increasingly good competition.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is impressive shit, and I'm very looking forward to his inevitable matchup with James Vick.
Yep. He is a sensationally good wrestler. He understands that. He pushes on his opponents. The effortlessness with which he transitions from, like, riding to controlling a body lock to hitting a takedown to then reversing direction to then riding to hitting a mat return to breaking his opponent down to beating them the fuck up. Like, he's a pretty non-stop, perpetual motion machine when it comes to wrestling. And the only question is, like, aren't there much better wrestlers at lightweight for him to be fighting? Like, isn't it time now?
Yeah. I mean, unless you really want to chuck him up against Islam Makhachev or something, like, there's nowhere to go, really. But yeah, I think, it's time for James Vick.
It's time for James Vick. I think I agree. All right. Well, we have that.
James Vick is comically huge, and it will look cool to watch Greg Gillespie taking him down.
Yeah, or knock him out with like a Minowa Man style leaping right hand.
Yep,
could happen. All right. Well, we have that to look forward to. How about Corey Sandhagen, who fought on the prelims? I really want to get to Jeff Neal. I'm kind of saving the best for last there because I think like Greg Gillespie might be the most like currently relevant of these guys, but Jeff Neal is the one who I think has most strikingly come out of nowhere to beat some very good opponents. But how about Corey Sandhagen, the Dillashaw disciple, the only one with a style that looked remotely like this, to win on this card. Of course, during Hernandez-Cerrone, they were talking about how Hernandez wanted to look and fight like TJ Dillashaw. And both he and Dillashaw got kind of mopped. Sandhagen made it work, but of course he was fighting a totally outmatched opponent on very short notice. Anything to take away from his performance? And maybe the more interesting question is, where does he go from here? What's his ceiling?
It's hard to tell because he is clever and defensively porous violence, which is awesome. So, someone I'm not sure who said it. It might have been Zane. He's basically bantamweight Carlos Condit, and this kind of means that he's an incredibly violent fighter in a division full of incredibly violent and exciting fighters, which makes it pretty difficult to say what his ceiling is. I mean, offensively, like I said, he is very he's very clever. I think that's the thing that comes out, as well as being savage. His ability to kind of pick off combinations and play with the jab and go to the body and so on was very impressive. Even if he was up against an outmatched opponent. And I don't know how much he was just kind of fucking around because he knew he was going to win, but his ability to chain like multiple submissions together was also that was a lot of fun, and I want to see more of it. I don't know if it's functionally going to work against high-end, but there aren't actually all that many of them at bantamweight. It's mostly just people kind of like him.
Yep. Just fucking bangers.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, he seems just like a crazy fucking wild man, and that is awesome. And I would like to see him against Thomas Almeida.
I would like to see him against Sean O'Malley right now.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be fun? Bantamweight is so good. It is.
Just remake that Lineker fight.
Yeah, why the fuck not? The interesting thing about watching Sandhagen is that you can see the elements of TJ Dillashaw, because of course he's going to get compared to TJ. He's the other bang Muay Thai guy here. I think is he Team Elevation as well? Pretty sure he is. But he's the other guy with that really distinctive, some of those really distinctive Ludwig style shifting moves. It's interesting to see the comparison between what limitations of Dillashaw's style are actually particular to him and what are native to the system he's been taught. Because Sandhagen does do a lot of variety that Dillashaw lacks. Like working body shots off the jab, for example. Don't think I've ever seen Dillashaw do that. Ever. So he's at the very least extremely dynamic. And willing to try everything. He's probably going to get knocked the hell out by someone at some point relatively soon, because I don't trust his defense at all. It mostly consists of him charging forward and then desperately covering up with both hands and then trying to extend the exchange after that. But for as long as it works, or if he has a tremendously good chin, it's really fun. It's good. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he's just... Like I said, he's kind of like bantamweight Condit, and there's just a million thrilling matchups for him. You could put him against Nathaniel Wood, or you could put him against Tom Duquesnoy, or whatever. Just no end of it.
Those all sound incredible. You could put him against Peter Yan. Why the fuck not?
If you're particularly evil.
Yeah. Well. All right. So let's talk about, to me, what kind of feels like the main event of this thematic segment. Jeff Neal took on Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad, once again, giving us a very good reason to remember the name in a sensationally courageous and gritty performance. But really, Jeff Neal had his number throughout the fight. Bilal had one momentum swing headed his way. In the second round, he started to work the body really aggressively, and then Neal found a way to turn it around. He kind of took his space a little bit. He stepped away from the body shots, and he went more into a counter-punching style, which eventually got the momentum back in his favor. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff Neal is very impressive.
Right?
Just level of composure, level of takedown defense. I mean... Muhammad is not a bad wrestler at all. And he
had some beautiful shots too.
Yeah. timed them really well. Got absolutely nothing done on Neil in the wrestling. I mean, and the whole time, like Neil's left hand is really something special. Mm-hmm. Like he has almost no tell on it. Doesn't wind up at all. Like Muhammad he's not the world's greatest defensive fighter, but he's not bad. He's generally pretty good at kind of darting out of the way of things and parrying them. Mm-hmm. He's, historically he doesn't have much in the way of head movement, but even then, the fact that Neil was just able to carve him up so
he's quick on his feet. He keeps his eyes open. He's a very aware fighter. So it's hard to surprise Bilal Muhammad totally, unless it was like, I can think of the hook of Vicente Luque, which was in the midst of an exchange when he had his eyes off his opponent, but at range to hit him with a straight shot like that over and over again when he's ready for it is, really, really impressive.
I mean, if you think of how good Tim Means is as a striker, and think of the fact that Bilal Muhammad basically just beat him in a purely striking contest, mm-hmm. like that tells you like that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, because
it wasn't a great deal to it. It wasn't like Sandhagen. It wasn't varied, but it was just immensely controlled.
Yeah, it was just a textbook ass win. Like the big thing is, like as you said, Bilal Muhammad beat Tim Means in the kickboxing bout. He doesn't do that kind of thing because he is all around the most technical fighter or the most powerful, or he doesn't have any of these really big advantages other than the fact that I think Muhammad is very crafty and a very good adapter. He reads his opponents really well and is willing to explore new avenues to take advantage of what they're showing him. We saw that with the low kicks against Randy Brown, when he wasn't getting the wrestling to work. But we definitely saw it here with the body shots. Like, he was doing everything he could to adjust. We saw it as his jab came into the fight more. I would have liked to see it earlier, to be honest. But as it did come into the fight, he was sort of fencing successfully with Neil, kind of just small stepping his way to the left behind the jab, away from Neil's jab. And the really impressive thing about Neil's performance is not just that he used his reach so well, or that he had such good form on his punches, that it was so hard to read them, or that his takedown defense was so technically flawless, or that he looked so fucking powerful, or that he could time head kicks the way he did. It was how well he read and responded to the adjustments of Muhammad. It spoke of like a real high level fighting intellect, I think, is what really came through. It came through against Camacho as well. But Muhammad was someone who was like, that's a much stiffer intellectual test than Camacho. You know exactly what you're going to get out of Frank Camacho. Bilal Muhammad always finds some way to surprise you, and if he didn't surprise you in the first round, he's likely to find a few ways to surprise you as the fight goes on. And he did. And, Neil just he remained incredibly calm and just picked Muhammad apart. And even when he had to take his foot off the gas in the second round, even when he had to kind of create space to get away from those body shots, he went back to, he had been destroying Muhammad, then he had to take his foot off the gas and go to picking him apart, and he picked him apart so thoroughly that he wound up back in the side of destroying him by the end of the fight, where he was just knocking him down, wrecking him with big shots. Muhammad fought his ass off, man. I will remember the name, goddammit, because he's such a great fighter. He's so fun to watch, but
yeah, I mean, right at the end, like, you have to give credit to Muhammad for just basically doing exactly what you'd want someone to do.
Yep.
If they're totally outmatched in this kind of fight and they've got no chance left, which is just to absolutely go for it.
Just go for it.
Because right at the end of the fight, he just charged. He just charged Neil. Like, it was all just flurries and flying knees. And that's one of the things I like about Muhammad. You can never accuse him of doing you can never accuse him of kind of doing the wrong thing from a strategic or tactical standpoint. And even when it comes to stuff where it's like, there's a significant chance you're going to get knocked the fuck out for doing this because you've already been dropped 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, but Neil, to his credit, didn't flinch under that right at the end. Managed to pull it back even when he got, hurt to the body. I mean, yeah, just really impressive stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great showing. All right, and a great card. What a way to cap it off. That pretty much does it for this episode of Heavy Hands. Before we head out, we should let you know what, if anything, we have coming out this week. I'm going to change it up, Phil. I'm going to say what I have coming out this week first. Unless, wait, do you have nothing?
I have nothing.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask you first. What do you have coming out this week, Phil?
I don't have much, Connor. What do you have?
You should, of course, plug the MMA Depressed Us, which we will be doing this week. You should keep your eyes and ears peeled Thursday, where Phil and I will be joining Zane Simon to watch bad fights and commentate on them. Think of it as, have I already made this joke? MMA ST3K?
Yep, you have.
All right. It's still a good one, though, right? As for me, I'm working on a piece about weight cutting. Just sort of an op-ed, sort of editorial look at the practice of weight cutting. Why is there a culture of weight cutting in MMA? How does it compare to the weight cutting culture in sports like boxing? And why is it fucking bad for you? And why is it the sole thing responsible for TJ Dillashaw getting knocked out in 30 seconds? Not really, but obviously it's relevant. And we have seen numerous other examples in recent memory of fighters either moving up and becoming incredibly durable relative to their earlier performances. Dustin Poirier and certainly Robert Whittaker come to mind here. But we've also seen plenty of examples of fighters dropping weight to a lower weight class and then becoming suddenly fragile. And if you're already fragile, as TJ Dillashaw kind of was, dropping weight doesn't tend to help. So keep your eyes peeled for that this week. Probably something else as well. I'm going to try to crank out another piece in addition to that because I didn't do shit last week. But until then, thank you all so much for listening. You should find us on the social medias with your comments, questions, or concerns. Or if you just want to have an enthusiastic conversation about how good Jeff Neal is, you should find us on Twitter. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. And you can find me at BoxingBush, BUSCH. You can find all of our written work, The Depressed Us, and everything else besides on BloodyElbow.com. And thank you all very much for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.